What up, y'all? It's the homie Dame, and despite being a huge Monogatari fan, I haven't done a Monogatari video in a minute. Actually, I don't really have that many Monogatari videos on the channel in general, mainly because it's more profitable talking about shows like this, or even this, for some reason. But I don't care about none of that, because this is not my job, so let's just talk about Monogatari. Alright, so we're doing a tier list of every anime arc, right? So I got this from a tier list maker, and hopefully it has all the arcs, but there are also like light novel arcs here, which I ain't read none of that, so we'll ignore those. Now, disclaimer, the rankings here will be relative, right? Compared to most other arcs in other anime, these are all like S tier in my opinion, but obviously we gotta use all the tiers here, so don't get your panties in a bunch if you see me putting something in D tier, because, you know, it's all just relative to other Monogatari arcs. Starting with Hitagi Crab. Okay, so we're going in chronological order, I see. Hitagi Crab is B tier. This is the arc that, or, you know, in Monogatari they refer to these as episodes, so I'll call it that here. This is the episode that started it all in the anime, and I'd say it definitely makes a good first impression. It has all the good Monogatari dialogue and a satisfying character arc for Senjugahara to go through. I was actually gonna put this in C tier to have it serve as the benchmark for the rest of the list, but I mean, come on. I can't help but bump it up due to bias. Mayoi Mai, or Mayoi Snail, is, C tier. Yeah, I mean, I'd say it's average, because, like, this arc has a whole lot of what Monogatari is famous for and infamous for, which is long, complicated, hard-to-follow dialogue about absolutely nothing. I can see a lot of people getting to this arc in the anime, which is literally like 3 episodes in, and being like, what the fuck is this? Then they like fall asleep or get bored, or they turn off the show and put on Black Clover instead. But the real ones are here for the pun-filled Nisio Isin dialogue with references that not even Japanese people understand. Tsuruga Monkey is A tier, because Kanbaru is the GOAT. She's just a straight up GOAT. Well, actually she's a monkey, but you know. Nah, but for real, this arc is so well structured in terms of how they set up the mystery of the Rainy Devil, and then just how Kanbaru's whole arc with Senjugahara plays out. And of course, it has one of my favorite fight scenes in anime ever, so, you know, it's gotta be A tier. This should tell you how strict and exclusive I'm being with S tier. Not just any old arc is going in S. Okay, but Nadeko Snake is D tier. As y'all may know if you watch this channel, Nadeko is one of my favorite characters in the show, but not because of this arc. She's a really boring and uninteresting character in this arc, which, you know, is arguably by design, but if you just watch this arc in a nutshell, it's not the best in my opinion. Tsubasa Cat would be B tier, just because it has the Araragi Senjugahara date where she jerks him off in the backseat of her dad's car. But not only does it have that, it has the famous Black Hanakawa tongue twister scene, so I gotta bring it back up to A tier. Hanakawa is also just a very misunderstood character, and a lot of episodes centered around her are kind of forgotten about by the fan base, besides one obvious one later on that everyone likes. But I personally really like Tsubasa Cat, so I don't know. Koyomi Vamp. Where do y'all think this one is gonna go? I'll give you a hint. It rhymes with mess tier. And I say mess because that's what Kiss Shot looks like at the beginning of the movie. Koyomi Vamp is the first S tier that I personally have. The Kizumonogatari movies that cover this episode are beloved by the fan base, and for good reason. They're filled with a lot more action, so there's a bit more excitement, and it's relatively accessible as a starting point for people who are looking to get into the series. But despite all that, it's still very much Monogatari at its core, with the jokes, the witty dialogue, the cinematography, and of course, the fan service. And for everybody who asks for a watch order for the show, you could start with Kizumonogatari, it's fine. Or you could watch this after Bakemonogatari, do whatever you want, it's not that deep. Karen B is the first arc in Nisei Monogatari. Okay, so this arc is interesting because it introduces a lot of great characters that I personally like. Obviously the Fire Sisters, and of course Kaiki. People like to meme and say Speedwagon is best waifu, but it's like Virgin Speedwagon versus Chad Best Girl Kaiki. But for me personally, I don't think the whole plotline of Kaiki scamming middle schoolers is as interesting as some of the other stuff that happens in the show, even though this is like a huge pivotal plot point or plot event that has big ramifications ramifications later on. I also think Karen is less interesting than Skihi, and just the pacing of the arc in general was a little slow for my taste. I don't know. I'm gonna say D tier, honestly, since I'm being harsh today, but it does have one of I don't want to say my favorite, but one of the most interesting Senjogahara scenes in the whole show. Basically, it's revealed that Kaiki was Senjogahara's first crush, and Araragi is like grilling her on their relationship, right? But she then says something that I always thought was really interesting. Basically, she says that at the point she was at in her life, she would have fallen in love with anyone that was willing to reach out and save her, and that just so happened to be Araragi.
私はその人のことを好きになっていたのかもしれないわね。そう考えたら虫唾が走るわ。
In my opinion, this is a really fire take on the common anime trope of like a guy saves a girl like a white knight and she falls in love with him because of course she's obligated to, right? The fact that Senjogahara admits this but then says at the end of the day she was glad it ended up being Araragi is just super dope to me. It felt very honest and human. The other half of Nisei Monogatari, Skihi Phoenix, is a bit better in my humble opinion. I'd say C tier. I think the whole idea of Skihi being a fake sister is a fire idea, no pun intended. And it fits in with the theme of Nisei Monogatari, with Nisei meaning fake or imposter. It handles the weird incest angle in a tongue-in-cheek and humorous Monogatari way. Like for real, what show can have you sitting there feeling smart and intellectual about fucking your sister? Because of course, this arc has that one famous scene you all know about. Quite possibly the greatest anime scene to ever be created. Do I even need to put a clip? Everyone should know what I'm talking about. Tsubasa Family is another Hanakawa arc that people find boring or skippable, which I think is insane. I'd say it's probably B tier. Now, if we're being real, the beauty of this arc is just that it's setup and development for Hanakawa, which makes the next arc hit that much harder. But on its own, I still think it's really good, because me personally, I thought that delving into the Hanakawa family dynamic was super interesting. But now we enter, I think the first episode of Monogatari the second season, and that's Tsubasa Tiger. And this arc, in my humble, but always objectively correct opinion, is S tier. And the reason why is 1, Araragi has a badass entrance with a giant sword, and 2, black and white short-haired Hanakawa. It's dope because while Bakemonogatari focuses on an introduction to a bunch of characters, episodes like Tsubasa Tiger really flesh out their journey and who these people have changed into. My favorite Monogatari episodes always have these moments of character deconstruction, right? Because let's be honest, from an outside perspective, the anime just looks like it's filled with a bunch of tropey characters and waifu archetypes. And you know, it is. But Nisio Isin is very much aware of that, and he presents these tropes in such a compelling way while giving a realistic explanation as to why the characters are the way they are. Like for example, Hanakawa seems like a goody two-shoes, perfect student who always does the right thing. Araragi even calls her a saint, right? That's how he sees her. And we see characters like this in anime all the time, characters who are self-sacrificing to a fault. Again, common anime trope. But Tsubasa Tiger shows us that Hanakawa doesn't think of herself as a saint, and she tells us a story that will disappoint us. If you're watching this video, I can assume you know how this story goes, but it just goes to show that at the end of the day, she's still a trope of a character, but she's a trope with depth, if that makes any sense. Next, we got Mayoi Jiangshi, which I personally think is B tier. This is one of the wilder episodes of Monogatari because we got like insane time travel, we get Loli Hanakawa, we get One-san Hachikuji. It's wild. It's like the Avengers Endgame of the series. But yeah, I like a lot of the episodes where it's specifically Araragi and Shinobu hanging out and just talking because their dynamic is arguably central to the series if you ask me, so it's nice to see them together. The next episode is a big one, y'all, and further proof that Monogatari the second season is the absolute peak of the series. We got Nadeko Medusa, which is of course an S tier episode. This, combined with a later episode, is easily my favorite parts of the Monogatari series as a whole, and is the reason why Nadeko Sengoku is not only one of my favorite anime characters ever, but also one of my favorite anime villains ever. Remember how I talked about this anime being filled with tropes, but like on purpose? Nadeko Sengoku is the tropiest of tropey anime characters. She's like the quintessential moe waifu blob. She's like Hinata on steroids. She's like a character caricature of the ineffective damsel in distress female character that people clown on anime for having too much of. But just like how Hanekawa has reasons for being the way she is, so does Nadeko. And again, if you know, you know. I don't need to tell y'all what happens here, but man, it's pretty good if I had to say. I'll just say that the twist and how they do that Nadeko reveal was one of the best moments I've had watching an anime. That's like the kind of shit that gets you out of your chair, or like making one of those stupid reaction faces you see on YouTube thumbnails. Now we got Shinobu Time, which, I mean, in a way is a continuation of Mayoi Jiangshi, and the ordering of these episodes in season 2 is a little jarring, but I mean, I'm not Studio Chef, so what do I know? What I do know is that Shinobu Time is A tier though. Now, a lot of people like to bring up the, how do I put this? Problematic relationship between Araragi and Hachikuji. But listen, y'all. I don't have anything clever to say, I don't know. Shinobu Time is definitely a fire episode though, and it hits on the feels too. I mean, actually this whole Hachikuji saga in general is low-key one of the most emotional journeys on the whole show. I mean, that whole thing with her mom, her just wandering around as a lost spirit, finding companionship with Araragi, and just the fact that she's dead and has to die again. It's some crazy stuff. But then we get into the final arc of Monogatari, the second season, and that is Hitagi End. And I'm sure no one will be surprised at this, but Hitagi End is S tier. Probably the most uncontroversial placement on this list. I mean, it's not like my picks are controversial to begin with. Y'all know I have basic taste. But this episode of Monogatari literally has everything. The twists, the turns, the dialogue, the high stakes, the problematic fan service, and of course, one of the best scenes in the entire show. Yeah, it's literally two people talking in an airport wearing stupid disguises. I mentioned this when I talked about her last arc, but Nadeko is truly one of the most fascinating characters in the show from a psychology standpoint. And she's paired with one of the other most fascinating characters in the show from a psychology standpoint, Kaiki. Now, I ain't no psychiatrist. I mean, my mental health is almost as bad as Lawrence Fishburne's health in Passenger. But even I find it endlessly fascinating to see Nadeko become a god and how that affects her internal struggles, what she wants in life, and just diving into her psyche. And again, the way the episode comments on usual anime tropes like waifu characters falling in love with the main character for no reason, and her using her cute personality as a facade to essentially deceive people. It's almost insane seeing how deeply she falls back onto her victim complex, and just watching Kaiki trying to take advantage of that, and how he finally outwits her. And oh man, it truly blows my mind that some fans consider Nadeko to be one of the worst characters in the show. I can see people thinking she's the worst girl, as in like the most hateable, because yeah, she's literally the main villain of the show. She's like Madara Uchiha. But to say she's a poorly written character is insane to me. Some people must have just watched Bakemonogatari and that's it, because next we got Tsuruga Devil, which I think is A tier. To me, this is the episode that really propels Kanbaru into goated character status. As if that doesn't already apply to every character in the show. But yeah, I actually didn't like this arc when I first watched Hana Monogatari, and I actually skipped watching it for a while. If y'all didn't know, this was actually supposed to be included in Monogatari the second season, but they separated it as its own like mini core, kind of like Neko Monogatari. But yeah, now I've learned to appreciate it because it's sort of a different vibe from the rest of the series, kind of like, again, Neko Monogatari. Because it takes place in the future, right? Most of the cast we know, Araragi, Sanjigahara, and Hanekawa, have graduated, so it's just Kanbaru getting into little adventures on her own. But man, does it turn out dope. And Kaiki comes back too, and that's always a plus in my book. Next we got Yotsugi Doll, and I'm not gonna lie, I barely remember what happens in this one, so I don't know. F tier? Sorry, something's gotta go there. It'd be a waste to not use all the tiers, right? Then we get into Owari Monogatari with Ogi Formula, which I would say is B tier. Again, this one is like that essential setup that makes future episodes more fire. But on its own, I still think it's dope, because I think that whole locked room, classroom riddle was really damn clever, and even though dumb clowns like me can barely follow along with the explanations, it's still enjoyable. Now, let's talk about the next two episodes at once, Sodachi Riddle and Sodachi Lost. I'm gonna put both in A tier. Sodachi is definitely a controversial figure in the Monogatari community. A lot of people dislike her, and a lot of people people think her arc is too convoluted, or, you gotta suspend your disbelief too much. Because, I mean, I get it. It's like, is it really believable that she wouldn't notice her mom decaying in front of her eyes? And is Araragi that stupid that he can't remember a childhood friend that he spent a lot of time with? But for me personally, I'm going into this with the understanding that Monogatari is about a bunch of people who are psychologically not all there, to put it nicely. That's really kind of the point of the whole show, so it's not really hard for me to suspend my disbelief here, especially when the explanations that the show gives are, pretty reasonable. So for me, I'm looking at the execution and the genius writing structure on how this complicated riddle was presented, and then how the solution was presented. Also, we get this scene of Hanakawa desperately trying to stop Senjo Gahara from beating Sodachi's ass, and that's just something everyone needs to see. Next, we got Shinobu Male, which is A tier for me. Oh, damn. I talk about how Monogatari Season 2 was the peak of the series, but Owari is really up there too. I really think it's just Nadeko Medusa and Hitagi En that carry Season 2. But this is a dope arc or episode because we get a look into a more vulnerable side of Shinobu. We get one of the most heartbreaking / heartwarming scenes in the whole show, where Shinobu cradles the dying body of her first servant, both of them in tears after being reunited after hundreds of years, until she gently tells him that he's been cucked. Truly wholesome stuff. Also, there's a lot of Kanbaru perversion, and I feel like any anime would benefit from more of that. Then we get like the sort of mini-series, I guess. It's Koyomi Monogatari, which is like a collection of a bunch of individual episodes. I mean, you could consider this like skippable material, except for the last episode, Koyomi Dead, which, I mean, kind of obvious from the title why you need to watch that one. But I think it's actually a really entertaining watch, so I'm gonna put it in C tier. And then we got Mayoi Hell, which I would say is probably also C tier. Definitely some very Monogatari things going on here. It's basically Araragi and Hachikuji hanging out in, hell. Again, it's all set up for the final act of Owari Monogatari, but I still think this arc has a lot of really good moments on its own. Next, we got Hitagi Rendezvous, which again is C tier, I think. Another setup arc, but this one really feels like the calm before the storm. Everything is brewing for this big final conflict, and we take a small moment to have the GOAT anime couple, Araragi and Senjo Gahara, go out on a little date. And of course, any scene of these two just talking is already 10 out of 10 transcendent storytelling, so And now we've come to the end, y'all. The final episode of Owari Monogatari, and the final episode of this act of the Monogatari series, at least until Monogatari Shippuden gets adapted. I'm talking about Ogi Dark, and of course, Ogi Dark is S tier. Now that I think about it though, these S tier episodes rely a lot on the build-up of other episodes to really make an impact, and this one more so because it's like the culmination of the entire series up to this point. Surprise, surprise, Monogatari is a really well-written show where every event is intertwined and every little occurrence has meaning. What a shocker. But the reason this arc is so fire is because we finally face the real final boss of the show. If Nadeko was like Madara, then Oshino Ogi is like Kaguya. And I'm sure I don't need to tell y'all that Ogi's true identity is Araragi himself, so it's literally that Spider-Man pointing meme. But the reason that I love this episode so much is that it goes back to me talking about how Monogatari handles anime tropes. The self-sacrificing anime MC who just does anything he can to help anyone, even if it kills him, especially if they're a hot girl. Araragi is this times a million, and this time he faces the consequences of being such a Captain Save-A-Ho. What's that fool name? Captain Save-A-Ho! Again, it just shows how self-aware and meta Nisio Isin is. He's aware of what kind of characters he's writing and how to get the most out of them while still keeping their tropey essence. Because despite confronting Ogi and being a little bit selfish and acting for himself for once, how does the series end? With Araragi running off to help some other girl again. The episode is incredible, it's heartwarming, it has its share of fan service with a whole bunch of characters returning. It's also epic because it feels like a big confrontation that's been brewing because you have Gaian planning this whole war strategy to beat Ogi. And of course, it gives us a satisfying conclusion to Araragi's high school years. So yeah, that's every Monogatari arc that's been animated. Hopefully I didn't miss anything. Oh god, what are these light novel arcs? What the fuck? Saruga Bonehead, Jesus Christ. Nadeko Draw. Who the fuck is Suzura? Shinobu Suicide, oh my god. Alright, let me get off this before I spoil myself. yeah, I forgot about Koyomi Reverse. C tier. Only because Reverse Nautica was like the best thing ever.